I think you've said that the Ganga, Jamuni, Tehjeeb. uh,
I need,
you,
because my energy can't be contained. By
okay, fine. You can. I will. So I'll probably start.
It's the incurable rogue of a lawyer.
So, I think you refer to the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb as a fiction
Yes.
created to show a syncretic relationship.
Yes.
Now, if that's a fiction, what's your view of the base case, worst case, best case between the two communities in India?
So, I'll tell you how this creature came to be created. There is an element of truth, but the causal factors which are being imputed to it are flawed. Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb is not the product of a foreign religion's ability to coexist. It is the product of the convert Hindu, his inability to give up his cultural roots. Language, Nariyal Phodna, Diya Jalana, is not the sign of accommodation of the outsider. It is the sign of passive resistance of the insider for a few generations until that is completely scrubbed off his Atma. So I'll give you an example from a different society altogether. After the Arab conquest of Persia, why did Iran or Persia become Shia and not Sunni? How did that even happen? It should have led to Sunnification of the particular country. How did it become a Shia country? Because if you look at, let's say, Africa, Latin America, and all these places, every community has its own way of resisting that particular imposition. And they find either local ways of resistance or, let's say, outside ways of resistance, which is, if there is no way I can escape conversion, I'll find something to counter the mainstream within. And there were two pillars of resistance in Persia: denomination and language. So therefore, there was an insistence on Persian, and which is exactly the legacy of the Safavid empires and subsequent empires. And there was an insistence on Shiification of the community. They saw that as their way of resisting the imposition of the Arab. Which is why at every possible opportunity, when even Humayun and Babur kept running away to Persia, Madad de do, they said, Shia ban rao, de denge. That's exactly was the olive branch of the term offered to them. 100% we'll support you. Umma chumma, everything done. But you will effectively convert to the Shia denomination. That much is very clear. Similarly, if you go to, let's say, Africa, they tried to protect those non-religious aspects of their culture in the face of Abrahamic onslaught from both sides, because effectively that entire continent is the battleground for these two colonialities. Bharat is effectively going through the very same experience. It's a question of the inherent spiritual strength and other strengths of this particular community that you have still survived in larger numbers. That is never given credit to. So the subscription to the 12-verse Shia denomination by the, let's say, the Persians was in fact a matter of resistance. So Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb effectively shows for a few generations that the convert is unable to give up his actual love for Mother Ganga and for everything associated with it. And how that is scrubbed off his consciousness is captured from the birth of the Wahhabi movement, not in the Middle East, but in the heart of Bharat. So around 1998 and 2000 onwards, that was a time when Rediff.com was still a great portal for fantastic articles being written on national security and whatnot. In fact, all the current, let's say, greats like Mr. Rajiv Srinivasan and everybody else, they used to write for Rediff.com in the 90s. That when the internet boom was happening, this was the kind of literature that I was actually having access to. I remember from my memory of those days that the talk of the sudden Wahhabification of Indian Muslims was being aired as if it's the product of sudden infusion of Gulf money. But when you read the literature, you will realize that this particular facet of that particular community has existed for over 250 years here. and has played the central role in the creation of radical Islam in this part of the subcontinent. Now, whether radical is needed or not, I'll leave it for the audience to decide. Now, therefore, the point I'm trying to make is the direct correlation between the establishment of the Wahhabi power center and the creation of the Taliban has been spoken of by Pakistanis. I've cited them in this book. Aisha Jalal, in her book, The Partisans of Allah, specifically points to this, as to how the Haqqani network and the Taliban network is directly a product of the mosques set up by the Deobandis and others. Their seminaries. I think around 2011 or 12, I had the opportunity to visit a particular cantonment because a friend was working there. And he confirmed all of this. This was, of course, not confidential information. This was already out and being spoken. It just so happened that the mainstream media was not capturing it because it's uncomfortable, unsecular reality to realize that Wahhabi Islam is not an importation from the Middle East, but is the Paidawar and the Paidaish of Bharat. That the progenitor of this particular mindset, Abdul Wahhab and Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, studied Hadith in Arabia at the same time from the same teacher, is what I'm trying to establish here. And therefore they were contemporaries. It just so happens that because the Wahhabis were attacking British ports in Jeddah and other places in Arabia around that particular period, Wahhabism had suddenly become part of the parlance. And therefore that parlance was used here to say that there is a similarity in mindset between the two sects, or let's say the two groups in Bharat as well as in the Middle East, so let's call them Wahhabis. Otherwise, the Wahhabis of Bharat were actually called the followers of Tariqa-e-Muhammadiyah, the path of Muhammad. This is the actual name of the Wahhabi movement in Bharat. And how there is a continuous line, every institution that is set up. So the map has been selected on the cover page for that reason. To say each of these institutions located here trace their origin to the central institution in Delhi. So, according to me, the Ganga Jamuni Tehjeeb is, even if it existed, a matter of past. And where it exists not because of the accommodation of another faith, but because of the inability to give up something and perhaps the resilience of the native to a significant extent. And that credit must go back to Hindu Dharma and nobody else. Now, coming to the second part of your question, what do we do next? I think we are hoping that economic incentives will do the job. I'm not sure it's a particularly great SWOT analysis. Because I don't think it helps to be so desperate to look for secular reasons and secular solutions to a religious problem. Then the goalpost is being shifted. And if you think it is going to lead to empowerment in a positive sense and the ability to assimilate and coalesce, well, the best of terrorists in this country come from well-funded Saudi countries or let's say Middle Eastern countries. It's not as if economics has made a difference to them. The reason that this must be traced to a particular mindset is because in certain portions of the book, I capture their own words. Allow me to say this, and everything that I'm going to say is lawful and legal, so I'll say it, and with basis. Shah Waliullah Dehlavi effectively believed that the advent of his faith is for the destruction of the entire global world order as it exists. And the means to actually achieve that particular end is jihad. This was his clear position. Now, he lived in the mid-18th century. Maulana Ala Maududi, Abu Ala Maududi, who was the one who advised Ziaul Haq towards greater Shariafication of Pakistan, believed in the very same thing. And it's no surprise that the rise of Taliban and the rise of this man to power and Ziaul Haq's regime all coincided. And his very clear position was to say that there can be a separation between the mosque and the state and that Christian style secularism is possible in Islam itself is haram. Everything is governed by it because it is seamless and never ending. Therefore, until that ultimate objective is achieved in terms of destruction of the world order and its recasting in Islamic mold, this will be a perpetual conflict. And that is, according to me, the founding DNA of Pakistan and everybody else who believes in the idea of Pakistan. You cannot negotiate here. I wish there was room for negotiation. The only way that this can be dealt with is in the very language that it understands, and whatever that language may be. And the ones who are following this path at this point and doing so successfully, unfortunately, these are terrible examples to draw inspiration from. Eastern Europe and China. Terrible examples. I say this myself. But they are the only ones who seem to be able to contain this particular beast. Either through stringent policies on border controls, which they unabashedly defend even on BBC, or the clear position of countries like China, of Russia. The problem is, since Bharat is essentially democratic in its spirit, it struggles to emulate any of these models. There is no doubting it, and I'm not going to hold this against Bharat for it. You may have the conviction of China, but whether the Chinese model works for you is something you have to ask, because that model is always on the verge of implosion because of the pressure that it creates. It's like a it's like a pressure cooker that can explode anytime. There are no safety valves. Ask anyone who's a student of free speech jurisprudence, any Supreme Court, whether in the United States or Bharat, both effectively being the same because we look up to them, is that we say the reason why free speech is necessary is because when a person doesn't have the ability to change policy or to get things done the way he wants to, the only vent that the common man or the common person has, to put it in Justin Trudeau's language, is free speech, the ability to shout and vent and rant. That is one of the roles that is performed by free speech, which is a safety valve. उसका तो कुछ होना नहीं है, but चिल्ला लो, हम आपको दे देंगे. So democracy is contained oligarchy where multiple interests are managed as opposed to a limited number of interests. And you're given the belief कि आप भी इसमें भागीदार हैं. आप जीते रहो इसी delusion में. How was the Rajya Sabha created? Why was the lower house created? How the language of lower house and upper house was created, you should actually read in portions of the book. I've captured it. Since our geniuses were saying that we must be part of stakeholders, we must be stakeholders in policy making, legislative policy making, they created, let's say, certain electoral constituencies or certain elective components. Otherwise, previously it was indirect election, they changed it to direct election gradually. But to ensure that ultimate veto and power making, let's say, decision is in a body of bureaucrats, the upper house was created. The Chamber of Princes and so on and so forth. So that the wielders of power continue to have the veto. Power is not in getting things done, power is ensuring that your no has a value. Which is to say, if I say no, that's the end of all your discussion. Chintan Mantan ho gaya, it's over. The power of veto is the true value of power. Which is to say, are you the limiting agent in a chemical reaction? Then you will decide the rate of reaction. That's it. And whether it happens or not. And that is captured in the evolution of our bicameral system.